that Rhode Island has changed and the United States has changed considerably in the last 40 years. In fact, there are more women today than ever before in our history in the workforce. And in fact, you've seen the numbers in all the studies, there are more women who are primary breadwinners in the family than ever before. Yet, our policies have not kept pace with what's been happening in the workplace. Quite the opposite. So we have a 1950s June and Beaver model, right? The Cleaver family, I'm dating myself clearly, for a workforce, for a society that has markedly changed. And so, policymakers and business leaders and politicians are not acknowledging and recognizing the needs of women as a part of the burgeoning workforce as critical to their bottom line, despite the fact that business case after business case after business case supports that policies that advance women in the workplace have a positive effect on the employee, on the employer, and on the bottom line of the company. Companies that have more women at the top perform better, in good times and in bad times. So the whole, it costs too much, it is a lot. All right, but power is hard to give up, and that's what we're asking for, right, is shared leadership and power, and that's not an easy thing. So what we do, instead of addressing the difficult thing, the elephant in the room, is we do more and more to counterbalance the impact of not making the changes that meet the needs of Rhode Island workforce. And you know better than I know, the cost to our health care, to our health, individually, is staggering. In terms of outcome, in terms of impact, and in terms of costs. So we as a state choose to remain in that state of pre-contemplation. And as we all know, nothing's changing because nothing's changing. So, as I mentioned earlier, I got to see firsthand how policy impacts culture. And my first stop was in the country of Iceland, and I see Iceland very different and very similar to Rhode Island. They're this tiny country that is trying to keep itself afloat and not be attached to, Denmark again or Norway again. And they're surrounded by water. And most of the people live near the capital, right? And the rest of it is fairly agrarian, and the beaches are beautiful, and there's these wonderful spots, and the quality of life is good. Sound familiar? So there's a lot of similarities, and then there are some differences. So when it was like day 2, you're sort of in that stupor from traveling, and you're walking around, and so I'm walking around with a cup of tea thinking, where am I? And I do not understand a word that is being spoken, but they look at me and they think I look like them, so then they're talking to me in their native. Luckily, they all speak English, which was very helpful. Somehow I wasn't going to manage to learn 5 different languages before I went on the trip, so I was grateful that they were speaking English. But I started to look around and notice my surroundings, and what I was noticing was the number of baby strollers. They were everywhere. And this wasn't, I wasn't there on a weekend. My first day there was a weekday, and I was like, there are population explosion. What's going on here? They were everywhere. And more than 50% of them were being pushed by men. And not with their spouse or their partner next to them, but they were out there on their own. And I'm thinking, wow, what's going on here? Like, is it Dad's Day in the park? So the researcher that I am, I start looking around and I start asking some questions. Hey, Dad, what's going on? And what turns out is that these dads are home on paternity leave. And in Iceland, they have 9 months of family leave, paid family leave. 3 months is given to the female. 3 months is given to the other partner. If you're male, you have to take those 3 months. You can forfeit those 3 months, but there is no child care in the way that we do child care here. So mom takes 3 months, dad takes 3 months, and then you decide the other 3 months who's going to take it. You can split it, you can do whatever you want. Child care starts at 9 months, and it's universal child care. So now they have quality child care that's standardized across the country. So babies are at home with family for the first 9 months of life. You're all shaking your heads because you know the health outcomes of this better than I do, right? Dads are engaged, moms are engaged, education, childcare provided for. Iceland has one of the highest birth rates in the world. Now, when you think about Rhode Island and our economy, maybe what you don't know is that we are aging rapidly. We are one of the oldest states in the nation, and we're projected to be number 2. I think we're number 7 right now. We're projected to be number 2. And the reality of that is that at 65, 60% of us are female. At 75, 70% of us are female. At 85, 80% of us are female. And at 90, we're almost all female in this state. Yet, this is the fastest growing population of people living in poverty in this state. Women are living on 50% less than men are living on in retirement. And it's a problem. It's a huge problem. And at the same time, we don't have people racing to live in Rhode Island, right? So there's got to be some balance in terms of income, taxes, tax base, paying for things. So, you know, Iceland's figured it out. They figured it out. They figured out how to preserve Iceland, how to preserve culture, how to actually give work-family balance for the best educational, health, economic outcomes that they could possibly have. So, and I expected, you know, the men to sort of be like, yeah, I have to do this. They were like, you know what, when they first passed these laws in Iceland, I thought, this is for women, let them have it, okay. But I had no idea the impact that this was going to have on me as a father. I had no idea of the impact that this was going to have on our family. And I had no idea that this was really something that I wanted to participate in, that I really wanted to be able to caregive for my children. That is a huge cultural shift. There are lots of, not to say that Rhode Island fathers don't want to be fathers and don't want to be engaged, but if we're going to, how many of you have heard your spouse say that they were babysitting for the kids, right? How many of you, when you're figuring out who's going back to work after the child is born, they look at your salary and they say, well, you make less, so, you know, the decision is based on what your income is versus what the family combined income is and what's the best financial decision for the family. So another way that I sort of in Iceland saw the impact was in representation. And Iceland, the business women in Iceland, I got to meet with Marcia, who was one of the top economic performers, business owners in the country. She and I sat down for a long conversation, and I said, you know, talk to me about what you're doing in the business community. And she told me that they had helped to pass a law that mandated women on corporate boards. So the mandate is no less than 40% men or women, no more than 60% men or women on corporate boards. And if you don't have this, then you can be shut down. Right? Mind-blowing. I was like, wow, cool. So then I said to her, so like in actuality, how does this work? So the law hadn't actually gone in, or had just gone into effect. Sorry. Something's barking at me. And, very interesting. Here's the story. So this law, they worked with all business owners, the men were at the table, they agreed absolutely unequivocally this was the right direction, it needed to happen, and we were going to do this. But the men at the table said, could we have a little time? So they said, all right, so they gave him 4 years. 4 years to ramp up. 4 years to ramp up. Not one corporate board had the requisite percentage of male and females until the law went into effect. They weren't willing to do it until they were mandated to do it. And when they mandated it, then suddenly there were plenty of women to fill these corporate board seats that weeks ago or months ago or years ago didn't exist. So, you know, just another example of how public policy really does move the agenda and move the